In our day-to-day existence down here on earth, we get to see how our lives get to play out, in different strata of life and in different ways of getting to do things. We get to see how things get to change. We get to see how we ourselves get to change. We get to see how we grow. We get to see how we retard. And most times our experiences down here aren't so different from the experiences of those gone before us, the experiences of those who came here before us, the experiences of those we now read up in history books for those who were popular enough to make it into the annals of history, and those left to the mercy of their family members to get to keep their memory in mind as far as they can do that before they finally fizzle into oblivion. And in looking at our lives, in juxtaposing these experiences, we've come to have both of those in the past and our own experience is the human experience, is the experience of the human race, is the experience of the human capacity to adapt to different places. It's the experience of humanity's interaction with the environment we find ourselves in, the environment we find other bodies inside, the environment we now claim to be our own, the environment we now claim to be our own. And so one begins to ask the question, how should life move? How should life be? How shouldn't it be? What should we do? What shouldn't we do? How should we look at life? How shouldn't we look at life? What are the things we ordinarily ought to do that we are not doing, and what are the things we don't want to do that ordinarily is also happening, and what are the things we want to do but we don't want others to do to us, and what are the things we want others to do that we ourselves don't want to do. That becomes the basis of the basic ethics we get to look around us. And for someone like Immanuel Kant, he comes with the categorical imperative of, do to others what you ordinarily would want them to do to you. But you're not living in this world alone. You're living in this world in relationship with others. You're living in this world in relationship with the environment. You're living in this world in relationship with other things outside of yourself. Which makes a lot of persons also get to ask the question whether there's actual meaning in our lives down here, or we are just some evolutionary miscalculation, some mishap that happened in the course of evolution. I think I strongly contend with, as it concerns the fact that I don't think life ordinarily is without meaning. Because explain why we get to dress up, not go out naked, get to eat, get to call people, get to text people, get to write the way we write, get to do things the way we do things, get to buy and sell the way we do things. How we apply the economy of our life down here, what the Catholic Church will call the economy of man's salvation. And so, if ordinarily there is a purpose to life, regardless of whether we know this purpose or not, regardless of whether the purpose of existence is clearly stated out or not, it begs the question, what are we doing here? How are we to live our lives down here? Even if we are not destined, even if we are not determined to have a purpose down here, what do we do in between the times we find ourselves alive? What do we do? How do we move on? How do we see life? How do we progress? How do we navigate our ways down here? There are two ways to get to look at it. Between Halloween, All Saints, and All Souls Day, these three days of different commemorations done predominantly in the West, and how they get to look at life. What has come now to be Halloween came up from All Hallows, but what we now have is almost like a celebration of the demonic, the celebration of horror, which would make sense to the course of our conversation today. The next is All Saints, which is on November 1st. The celebration of all the saints, all those presumably who are in heaven, so to say, whatsoever heavens means to you or don't. Then the next day we're going to look at is All Souls. That's the grand unifier of all of this, the grand leveler, the doom of all mortal creature, the doom of all creatures, the doom of all things that have life. if we are to talk about the doom in that particular way, because certain persons also make the argument about the fact that death is what gives life meaning. You get to see this also one way or the other from the Holy Writ, the Bible, where it says for the believer, life is transitioned, not ended. Life is transformed. Life is changed. And it's also the claim a whole lot of persons get to hold as it concerns the afterlife. And so what about the horrors of life that has come down to now represent Halloween, the living like a saint that is celebrated on the 1st of November, and indeed the grand level of all things, which is death, celebrated on the 2nd of November. You get to see how ordinarily things get to play out. Many persons in the course of their life tried living out a life worth living, like Fortishin will get to say, life is worth living. Many persons have tried that particular route within the biological limitations of their own existence down here, how they got to see things, how they got to respond to things, the message they tried passing and communicating to the next set of persons, and how eventually they died. And most of these persons today have come to be called saints, whether from the strict Catholic perspective of sainthood or the belief that more persons are in heaven than we ordinarily would never come to know. This particular take of sainthood, this particular take of trying to live life this way, for many persons, they tend to believe that this gets to limit the ways in which people get to carry out their agencies down here. You know, if you look at the life of a saint, you might not ordinarily, from a strict Catholic perspective, see a saint who was a womanizer from birth up until his dying days, and then died a particular way and is still considered a saint. It will not be possible to see that. But then some persons will argue such a person just probably wasted his time here, because why would such a person not want to carry out all experiences within his capacity as it concerns the human capabilities and capacities embedded within us, and get to explore life before getting to die and wait for whatever gets to happen down there. But then you see some persons talk about the Pascal wage and close their eyes to all the flaws that ordinarily is such a philosophical debate, because it doesn't really get to answer the question as to whether there is a God or not. You know, the whole idea of live your life as if there is a heaven and then die and get to discover that there is none and you lose nothing, than to live your life as if there is none and get to die and discover that indeed actually there is one. And yet there's still another group of people, those who just believe, you know, the saints were given certain levels of grace that is not made available for a whole lot of persons. As such, their lives have been resigned to where they are, and then there have been no attempts whatsoever to get to transcend their current state. There's no attempt by way of serendipity, by way of real-time struggle, by way of real-time commitment and responsibility to try to live a good life. But be that as it may, it doesn't negate the fact that a thing has a drive towards sainthood, a drive towards simplicity, a drive towards making sense of one's life down here, never goes out of fashion. There's never a time in the history of the world where, because a bunch of people, even the majority, gets to do a great chunk of things, we get to say and tell ourselves that this has become truth, this has become the new norm. It might be practiced, it might be accepted by a whole lot of persons, but it would never come to a point where such a wrong done by almost everybody, even if by everybody, would be considered right or would ordinarily come to be right. The way of getting to know such becomes the problem. And so if you look at the works of the philosopher Erich Fromm, you get to see this whole idea of virtue and what ordinarily constitutes virtue, regardless of whether it is known or it is not known, regardless of whether people get to see what ordinarily happens around them or not. And you also come to see the underlying substrate down here from the perspective that a thing is, regardless of whether it is known or not. The way of knowing is always the problem. How do we get to know that this particular thing is virtuous? How do we get to know that this particular thing is good? How do we know that this particular thing is ordinarily just and it's a thing we ordinarily should be doing? From here we get to, first of all, look at our lives and at least give someone like Kant a plausible way of getting to look at our lives down here. We want to accept the categorical imperative of the Kantian philosophy for as long as we want to hold it, you know. First of all, start from this particular perspective. Do to others what you want to be done to you in relation to such also being done to everybody. What do you want to see happen in the world? What do you ordinarily want to see as a way of life down here? Which also goes down to say, don't lie to yourself. And what does that mean? It means don't lie to yourself. Because if you ordinarily don't lie to yourself, you would come to the realization and the understanding that a thing like our lives down here would ordinarily make sense if and only if we don't lie to ourselves. And so what can the saints teach us? What can those we have come to call saints teach us? They can teach us a lot of things, you know. The fact that we are not perfect beings, the fact that we are struggling, the fact that our lives down here ordinarily should not be taken too seriously, the fact that we as a people can make progress, we as a people can better our lives. There are lots of things we could learn from them, whether we ordinarily strict adherent of the Catholic religion, the Catholic faith or not. It still goes down to say that we could pick a couple of things down here, even if we want to employ eclecticism as a way of going, as a way of being, as a way of getting to do these things. Because we cannot live our lives down here as though we are brutes, as though we are robots, as though we're people that cannot be controlled, the people that cannot control the way we get to do and the way we get to see life. You get to see the works and the philosophies of somebody like Robert Sapolsky and his whole idea of determinism, and you want to ask yourself, are we really doomed? Are we just here just like animals, eat, drink, have sex, have some parties, get drunk, be almost anything we can be, doctors, engineers, and then what? Is that all there is to life? And how do we even get to this particular place? How do we arrive at this particular realization that there's almost no meaning in life? It's a thing that traumatizes me the same way the lives of some saints also got to leave me very traumatized as a young boy growing up, because when I was a young boy, I strongly wanted to become a saint, you know, trying to do almost all the things I ordinarily would do, being raised by my mom and being taken to church very, very early, and being taken to catechism also at the age where I got to learn a couple of things about the Catholic Church and a couple of things about other religion, and being introduced to the lives of the likes of Maximilian Kolbe and the fact that he could give up his life, and being introduced to the lives of martyrs who gave up their life. And then we had the whole idea of the blood of the martyrs are the seeds of the church. They are the water that watered the foundation of the church, and you want to die. And you see the whole reality of many Christians getting to be killed up north by Boko Haram, and you ask yourself, can you die for Christ? And that was the chant around that period. Can you die for Christ? What if people enter the church now and then they say, will you die for Jesus, or will you be killed? Until I got to the point of experiencing the apology of Plato and the dialogue in Crito, and what ordinarily became Socrates' death. And up until now, I have asked philosophers from different walks of life, from different countries. I have written to different professors trying to ask this particular question. The whole idea of Plato's account of Socrates' death, did it really happen the way it happened? I asked this question, and I will continue to ask this question because it looks too good. It looks too good. And last week in a bar, I had a conversation with a freshman from a faculty of philosophy in one of the universities in town, and our conversation spanned along these particular questions, and he was trying to look at Socrates' death as almost a death of a weakling, as a cowardice, as a death that ordinarily shouldn't be. He was looking at it from the fact that someone like Socrates shouldn't have ordinarily died the way he died if he had left, if he had fled, and he cited somebody like Plato who had to flee, and by extension also one would talk about the sentencing of Diogenes out of his people, and then him telling them, I sentence you now to remain in your island. But what fascinates me about that particular account of Plato is the fact that Socrates stood for something. He hung around. He stated the laws were unjust. The circumstances around which he was sentenced were also not just. But then he believed that breaking the law just to prove the law is as good as breaking the law, because that is what indeed it is. But a young philosopher asked me, if you break an unjust law, is that breaking the law? If you break these unjust laws, is that ordinarily you breaking the law? A thing that has seen to things like civil disobedience and the likes of Che Guevara and this type of philosophies woven around the likes of Gandhi, the likes of Martin Luther King, the likes of Steve Biko, the likes of Nelson Mandela, the likes of Mahatma Gandhi, and you ask yourself, are they also wrong? When you break an unjust law, when you don't uphold an unjust law, are you breaking the law? And then Euthyphro's dilemma comes in place. Is a law just because it is just, or it is just because it has been stipulated as such by an authority to be just? Is a law because the gods have given it down to us, or the laws become the law because the gods get to accept it? The gods, be there from a religious perspective or the politics we find ourselves and the governing structure we have come to have as a people. It's a serious question we ordinarily must get to answer. But on the basic level, on the normal level, on the basic assumptions of our lives here and the premonitions that maybe our lives have meaning, maybe we have a purpose, maybe there is an afterlife, what can we say as it concerns the fact that sainthood is going out of fashion? You get to hear people talk about virtue. Let's go back to old virtue. Let's go back to the old religion. Let's go back to this. Let's go back to this. Whenever such assumptions are being stated, whenever people talk about things in that particular light, one thing that is very clear is the fact that we in our times, day by day, are just floating. We don't go deep into really thinking about things. We just want answers in the now. We just want life to be simple. We just want things to be altogether easy. And if you cannot make sense out of your life, come on, give the struggle. You know, human life is imperfect. Our lives down here ordinarily is not supposed to be led as robots. But is living a life as a saint a robotic life? I don't think so. Despite how hard it is to get to wrap our heads around the realities of our lives and what constitutes our being down here, it goes to say, and it goes to point us to the direction that we also can make sense of our life. We also can try. Whether you try or you don't try, you're going to regret either, like Soren Kierkegaard will get to tell us, whether you do a thing or you don't do a thing, you regret whatever decision you get to take. And when you say you don't want to take a decision, you don't think you can be this, you have already taken a decision, and the decision is the decision not to make a decision. And when you make a decision not to take a decision, you have to be ready to live with the consequences of not taking a decision. You have to live with the consequences of not making a decision, the consequences of living your life as though nothing really matters, as though things ordinarily are given to chance. And when you do that, how you get treated by other persons also shouldn't be a thing you ordinarily want to complain for the rest of your life, because, come on, you made a decision, you wanted to live your life a certain way, and you are living your life in that particular way. So you shouldn't be complaining that your life is going down that particular way, because what did you expect from people when you get to treat them and when you get to interact with them with all the levels of your nonchalant attitude to life and to existence down here. They treat you the same way. They give you back your shit the way the way you give it to them. And you know what they say about getting to be ready to accept what you are ready to dish out. In situations like that, in situations of our life and in the ways we get to see things, we get to look at life and our existence down here and tell ourselves it makes sense. The saints are lovely people. They never had an easy life. They never had a simple life. They had things very difficult for them. They were struggling, and you could talk about grace all you want. You could talk about grace and what that ordinarily means for you from now into the future, till next year, till 10 years from now. We could argue about the fact that grace sometimes is a very difficult conversation to have, and one looking at the life of St. Augustine and even Thomas Aquinas would not come to find conversations around grace very easy. Is it that it is left for some and it is not left for some? Is it that it is open for some and then it is not granted some? It is not granted to some. What ordinarily constitutes grace? What ordinarily constitutes the way we get to live life here, and how should we navigate these places? There, God that gets to grant this grace to a group of persons, and what are the necessary disposition one has to have on one's own before one gets to merit such, or if it's not merited at all, why is it that it has not come to certain persons as opposed to it coming to certain persons? All these are questions that are plausible to ask. But for today, we're looking at the fact that a thing as sainthood, a thing as a virtuous life, never goes out of fashion. It benefits the person, and it benefits the next person, it benefits the society, it benefits everything good, it benefits everybody. And it's a thing we ordinarily should give a shot at. In our family lives, in the ways we get to do things, in the ways we get to do business, in the ways we get to practice our philosophies, in the ways we get to interact with our theologies, in the ways we get to interact with our culture, interact with our business, the economy, the government, politics. If we bring a touch of a saintly life, a virtuous life, things ordinarily would make sense. We will not be having the senseless wars we have been fighting for the longest, the senseless wars we've been having, the wars that ordinarily don't make sense, the wars that have left us divided on many fronts, the wars ordinarily that we shouldn't be giving attention to and we shouldn't ordinarily be propagating as it concerns our lives down here, because it matters how we get to live life here, it matters what we get to do. And the wars are so senseless, the killings in our times, the disheartening stories we get to read in the news, and the censorship ordinarily also that comes with reporting of gory tales and the selective reporting even. Our thing is that we as humans in the 21st century shouldn't be giving attention and allowing to come our way, because whether you like it or not, when you look around you, you see a lot of things to get to despair about. You see a lot of things to be very angry about. You see a lot of things to be very, very annoyed about. And so whatsoever you think about a thing like the Catholic Church, whatsoever you think about virtue as a way of living, it begs the question, which is better? To live our lives down here as though we are brutes, primitive, in the Hobbesian state of nature, or as the civilized people who've come to claim to be? A thing I really don't see. We claim to be very civil, we claim to be very articulate, we claim to be very sound, we claim to be virtuous, and then when we die, we have lots of eulogies written about us, we have lots of facilitations written about us, we have lots of good things talked about us. Our biographies come out perfectly so. And for even somebody like Napoleon, and for public figures, you get to look at their life from different perspectives. Moscow will get a different reality of Napoleon, as opposed to what Poland will have to say about Napoleon. It's another perspective, right? But on the ground level, a war happened, the plotting of people happened, Napoleon marched down to Moscow, stayed in Poland during the winter, and the rest is history. But what matters here is the fact that there were killings, there were plunderings, there were ransacking of cities, there was a war. And for whatsoever Napoleon's life is, his life is a life of war. And so when people get to read his life, for whatsoever reasons they get to do, you find the sheer beauty of his creativity. But let us not forget so soon that it was in relation to war. It was in relation to him being a soldier. It was in relation to him being a fighter, him being a killer. For whatsoever you want to consider a killing to be. We live in horrible times. Look at business, look at capitalism, look at what it has done to the mind. Look at the poor, look at the homeless on the streets, look at people sleeping in metros, look at people hanging around in different places, sleeping in subways, sleeping in the cold. Winter is just a couple of weeks down the road and people will sleep outside. Homelessness is a thing. Homelessness is a thing. People are homeless not because there's not enough down here for us. People are homeless because we have refused to look at virtue as what ordinarily we should look at it. For whatsoever problems Socrates' idea of the mean being virtue in the middle is, it's a plausible way to start. It's not the perfect way of looking at virtue, you know, the whole idea of the mean, always the mean, and then you ask yourself, at what point do we attain this mean? Even him, Socrates, would not give you an answer. If you look at his Nicomachean ethics or his whole quest for Eudemian ethics and Eudemia, you see to it that he doesn't really have clear-cut answers to things as ordinarily they are, as they ordinarily should be done. You know, he talked about the idea of hanging around for a very long time before you come to the idea of virtue or the idea of reason, and one begins to ask himself, what do you do before that time? What do you do before attaining reason? What do you do before attaining virtue? What do you do before attaining this particular thing he ordinarily is talking about? What do you do before you attain perfection? Since we must look at this from a teleological standpoint, what do you do? These are questions we ordinarily should ask ourselves. Are questions we are not asking ourselves in the modern world. Be it from the whole argument about the plausibility or the stupidity of a thing like pornography, you get to see that people have been used down here. Brain cells have been distorted. People have come to have different realities to things. Dopamine have been hyped in different levels. Women are being used. Girls are being trafficked. Contracts are being signed that ordinarily don't get to put women in the particular position they were ordinarily supposed to be placed. And people have been lied to a whole lot. The whole idea of sex lasting that long, the whole idea of the performative ways of getting to feel affection and getting to do things also are things people have come down to have on different perspectives. But you also get to see that there's something crumbling. Love, human relationship, interpersonal relationship is falling apart. People are using people in the 21st century. People go into relationship for themselves alone. People go into relationship because they want to go into a relationship and not looking at it from the classical definition of love as willing the good of the other, as wanting to be in a relationship to better the next person's life in relation to bettering one's life. People who go about living their life as if their life and their life alone matters. Down here, you don't want to live your life that way. And so we see people go down life angry, sad, painful, annoyed, because they have been used, because they have been treated unjustly, because they have been treated without virtue, because their lives have not been given the much meaning it ordinarily should be given. Their lives have not been given the much needed attention it ordinarily should be given. Their lives have not been respected by the next person. And it comes down to virtue. It comes down to this conversation we are having about the plausibility of a thing like lives of the saint. Forget the trauma someone like me faced reading the lives or the hagiographies of saints and the way their lives were recorded and how impossible it was for me to really come to ascertain such in my young life. And I think also I've not even attempted to the level I ordinarily would want to attempt trying to be virtuous in the day-to-day activities of my life down here. Forget about the fact that the lives of saints sometimes are discussed most of the time from the perspective of their heroism, from the perspective of all the virtues they get to put up down there. But look at Socrates and look at the way the man died. Whatever reason you want to hold for that. Man died for a belief he had. Man died after getting to interrogate life over and over and over again. Man died after examining his own life, after looking at things on different fronts and telling himself it is possible to die for something good. The saints were human, the saints suffered, the saints struggled, the saints had difficult times, the saints had it tough also. They didn't have their life all together easy. The saints were human. Look at the likes of Padre Pio, look at the likes of Mother Teresa, look at the likes of Gandhi, look at the likes of Nelson Mandela. These persons never had life easy on their part. They were not completely innocent of the flaws of humanity. Gandhi for a long time was racist, thanks to whatever he saw in South Africa and whatever India was under the British administration. Look at Martin Luther King. He did mistakes in his life also. Look at Malcolm X. These are people look up to today. Look at Che Guevara, a medical doctor who dropped his certificate and his practice to pick up a gun. Look at Fidel Castro. Look at the different persons that have tried within the limited understanding of what they think is a fight and struggle for justice and a struggle for peace in their life, and how they have interpreted such and how they led their life. You come to understand that you are not ordinarily meant to be perfect in a day. It is the coming at it every day. It is the repetition, like Cardinal Newman will get to tell us. It is the repetition of this stuff on a daily. It is the repetition of these things on a daily that gets to count. It is the coming back to the fact that a thing as virtue is possible, a thing as committing to a life of responsibility is important, and it saves a whole lot of persons that we should ordinarily look at. It is the fact that more persons would have stable lives, more persons will have stable houses, more persons will have stable jobs and feed well and live longer if we get to practice things and do things in the right direction, in the ways we ordinarily should do them. And so conversations about a lot of things come into play. On the one hand, you have contraception. On the other hand, you have being pro-life. On the one hand, you have the different ways the business models we have in our modern time have come to be interpreted. And on the other hand, you have people telling you how our nation is going to make profit. Why would nation make profit if they ordinarily get to do things the way they ordinarily should do things? Why won't your life be simple and our world be much more secure if we ordinarily don't look at the next nation, if we don't look ordinarily on the next person's window, trying to plunder and get things from such a person? All of civilization, all through the dispensations where we've come to call civilization, have never come about, have never happened without chaos, have never come to be without a fight, they have never come to us down here without the troubles we have come to see in our lives. The troubles we've come to actually see in our lives have been many, and yet we call this civilization. Why don't we try something new? Why don't we look at things from a different perspective? You must not necessarily go to a church to listen to that priest, but from the prick of your conscience, if you believe you have such a thing, I believe all of us have. Some people call it intuition, some people call it premonition, some people call it the conscience. Whatever it is to you, if you look at your life and you look at the way things are, and you look at the way things ordinarily should be, you get to understand that our world will be much more peaceful if people stop treating people as objects and start treating them as subjects. Our world will be much more loving, much more livable, and interactions down here will be much more comforting and helpful to the next person if we try being saints, if we try living good lives, if we try giving up our bad habits, because it benefits nobody. I read many years ago the book by a Jesuit, The Psychology of a Saint. This psychologist who also happened to be a Jesuit, or this Jesuit who happened to be a psychologist, brought the life of one of their founders, placed him on different levels of psychological analysis to examine and look at what ordinarily was a driving force of somebody like St. Ignatius of Loyola, what ordinarily championed his life, what ordinarily led him to the things he did. And in looking at someone like Loyola, you get to understand why the Jesuits are the way the Jesuits are, in relation to a whole lot of other persons that have come down to be Jesuits, from the likes of Father James Matson and what he does for the communities at the edge of humanity, the LGBT community. When you look at the papacy of Pope Francis, and you see the sheer admiration and intelligence in the way he has tried to navigate things down in the church for these past 10 years. You get to look at this and you tell yourself, these men ordinarily are benefiting from the psychology of a saint, from the thoughts and the inspiration that ordinarily led a man to do the things he did. You get to see someone like Anthony de Mello and you feel happy, because the Jesuits have produced a large chunk of people that ordinarily have come to shape our world and have come to shape the way we get to look at things and the way we get to function as a people. And so one tells himself, in a world where you can be a badass and in a world where you can be a saint, what should you do? In a world where you can strive for virtue, in a world where you can be a better person, a better human, in a world where you can move, live, be happy, strive for joy, and do all good things, why would you want to be a badass? Why would you want to be a bad person? And I believe ordinarily nobody wants to be a bad guy. Nobody wants to be a bad person. People are just caught up with decisions sometimes that are beyond their control. For as many Odysseus being shipwrecked in different parts of life, a thing we all are in one way or the other, getting to see to it that our lives get to change and our decisions get to fluctuate and move on different paths. That goes out to you as much as it goes out to myself, because we all are broken people. We all are broken beings struggling to master peace. You know, we're like masterpieces, but then we've been broken to pieces, and now we have to try to master peace. We have to try to master emotions and get to live life better. It goes a long way to say that we all need to treat the next person with care, with love, with concern. We all have to treat the next person with the level of understanding we ordinarily think such a person gets to deserve. Because we also are in need of loving, we also are in need of care, we also are in need of happiness, we also are in need of all the good things ordinarily life can bring. Because imagine a world where people treated people as people, a world where love is treated as love, kindness is treated as kindness, conversations are treated as genuine ways of getting to know the next person and are looked at as dialogues. Books are written without propaganda underneath them, without scoring some political goals. Truths are being spoken about as they ordinarily should be. Imagine this type of world. Imagine lovers telling themselves, I love you, and ordinarily mean that particular thing by saying, I love you. Imagine our times devoid of racism, our times devoid of classism. Imagine the future devoid of pain caused by ourselves, not the natural forms of pain. Imagine the ways we can reduce the pains we get to experience down here. Imagine how life ordinarily would be. Imagine how life can be. And ask yourself if that's not a life you ordinarily want to be in. If that's not a life you ordinarily want to participate in. If that's not a life you ordinarily would love to live. If that's not a life you ordinarily would, frankly speaking, want to appreciate. Tell me you will not want to live such a life. Tell me you will not be happy. I know some persons will say, I don't want such a life, it's going to be boring. But who says virtue is boring? Who says living a good life is boring? Who says doing things the way they ordinarily ought to be done is boring? It's not boring. It's just that we've come to have different ways of looking at these things, and we've come to tell ourselves otherwise. We've come to lie to ourselves a great deal. We've come to tell ourselves that we cannot. We've come to tell ourselves that virtue is not a thing for us. We have come to tell ourselves these many things, and for a very long time they are taking the shapes of truth. We have given up, absolutely. We have taken existentialism to a different level. We have resigned ourselves and we've died. As such, we now allow anything to go. We now allow anything to get to happen. As such, we don't look at lives as we ordinarily should look at lives. Our sense of life has been distorted. Our sense of beauty has also been distorted. And someone like Dostoevsky, who once said beauty would save the world, will be looking from wherever he is now, and he'll be like, are these people ordinarily not given to virtue? Are they not ordinarily given to the different levels of virtues that ordinarily even existed before we now having virtue as an act or as a habit? Just imagine virtue in the humanistic Greek worldview and get to look at the perfection in things as the virtue of those things, the virtue of this airport's case as the perfection in which it was shaped the way it was shaped by Apple, the perfection of things, ordinarily things being in their perfect shape, the perfection of art, the perfection of life, the perfection of beauty, the perfection of love, the perfection of our understanding down here. Imagine how sane our world would be, because people don't even believe in a thing like love again. People think people should use people, and even those who are being used think people should be used. As such, at every given point in time, people go into relationships because they want to use someone or they want to be used, against the backdrop of the minority of people who ordinarily get to find love. Because in our modern times, same way in the past, love has remained a very rare commodity. It is a thing that some persons just have to resign themselves to the fact that it might never happen to them. It might never be their portion. It might never be a thing they ordinarily would come to experience. Love. Some persons would never experience it. Love. Some persons would never come to get it. Love. Some persons will just continue to struggle and struggle and struggle. And for these persons who continue to struggle in their life to find meaning and find love and find purpose, why will anybody want to make it worse for them? Why will anybody want to make it much more difficult that they get to understand life, they get to experience life the way ordinarily they should experience life? Why will anybody want to wish the next person ill? Why will anybody ordinarily want to make life sad for such a people, such a group of people? It makes no sense. It makes no sense. And even in cartel lives, and even in groups that get to do this, live in ways that we don't even get to understand ourselves, we also find codes of conduct within and amongst this group of people. We find codes of doing things and how to ordinarily function among such groups and such organizations. And loyalty is a thing being given serious attention. Betrayal is a thing that remains betrayal. An enemy of the group most of the time becomes the enemy of everybody. And in our day-to-day living, we also should find a way to look at our lives and look at things from the perspective that we must come to tell ourselves that life down here can be better, it can make more sense, it can be livable if we get to do things the way we get to do things. And for whatsoever the Catholic Church has come to mean to you, whatsoever the Catholic way of life has come to mean to you, or for whatever stance you've taken about the Catholic Church, one thing remains, that a thing as a celebration of all sins, and the idea of pushing sins forward, pushing people who would remain role models to young generations and to generations yet unborn, is a thing we all must come to emulate. Is a thing we all must come to be thankful for. Because just like in the sciences, and just like in different organizations where different awards and prizes are being awarded to different persons on levels of perfection, on levels of academic achievements, on level of scientific breakthroughs and all that, within such structures you get to see man's quest for perfection, man's quest to better one's life, man's quest to better the life we get to live in here. And for the fact that we ordinarily don't see these things clearly written on walls and on billboards, that we all are searching for meaning, and we all are searching for purpose, and we all are searching for joy, it's also a problem we ordinarily must come to answer, and we ordinarily must come to face, and we ordinarily have to come to figure out for ourselves, because it matters the way we get to do things down here, and it matters the way we get to live our lives down here, because it matters. It matters. It just matters. Don't allow anybody tell you that it doesn't matter. It matters to everybody. People are searching for meaning. People are searching for purpose. And you could look up to the saints, not necessarily by the rigor of their life, but by the structure upon which they looked at things. Not because they ran away into the monastery, not because they were clustered in some cluster, or not because they found themselves in some convents and stayed there for the rest of their life. No, we the world. The world is my cluster. The world is where I find myself as the mendicant. I move about and I move around, doing things my way, doing things from whatever I've learned, from different life experiences. As the mendicant, I move about, trying to see to it that my life gets better in relation to the lives of other persons. That I, as a human being, come to respect my life, appreciate it, try to live to the best of my possible abilities, try to make sense of my life down here, and grow out of that, and grow into a better man in relation to other persons, while also trying to shine my light towards people, while giving them beams of hope that their lives are not completely useless, because my life, the life of this mendicant, has been nothing short of a miracle. And I'm happy that I've been able to learn from different stages of my life, that I've been able to learn from different phases of my life, that I've been able to look at different faces also and tell them, I see you the same way I hope you see me. And together, we can forge a better life down here. Together, we can grow in virtue. Together, we can grow in love. Together, we can grow in peace. Together, we can stand strong. Together, we can do this because we need love. We need virtue. We need good people. We need good men. We need good women. We need good children. We need good boys. We need good girls. Don't you want to be a good uncle? Don't you want to be a good auntie? Don't you want to be a good husband, a good wife, a virtuous person, a loving father, a loving mother, a caring sister, a caring auntie, a caring brother, a concerned cousin, niece, nephew, soldier, carpenter? Don't you want to be a good priest, a good bishop, a good pastor, a good politician? Don't you want to be a good lecturer? You don't want to be a good scientist? You don't want to be a noble woman, a noble man? You don't want your children to live virtuous life? You don't want to see the next person survive and live happily? You don't want the world to progress in virtue, as opposed to these monumental profits we get out of the exploitation of other persons? Don't you want to see a world where just wages are being paid? Or you don't want to experience life from a different perspective other than what you have now? Come on. Life is more than what we have. Life is more than what we've come to accept. Our resignations are too low. Our resignations are too down to earth. Our resignations are things we ordinarily shouldn't be resigning ourselves to. We should place ourselves on a higher pedestal. We should place ourselves on a higher pitch. We should give ourselves enough work to do, because indeed there is a lot to do. There's a lot to be done. And we must do this if we ought to grow and function and live happily. And the world is our monastery. The world is our convent. The world is our church. The world is our chapel. The world is our cloister. The world is our playing field. The world is our theater. And just like the hell has been loosed and all these demons down here, heaven also can be brought down to earth by saints who were once sinners. Because saints ordinarily were. And saints don't become saints when they die. Saints were already saints while they were alive, not when they die. Not when they died. For you to be a saint, you have to have lived your life here, doing ordinary things in extraordinary ways, trying little by little by little to make sense out of your life, little by little by little to grow, little by little to stand tall, to stand strong, to be the man you want to be the woman you want to be the man you want your children to be the woman you want your children to be the human being down here who ordinarily smiles and tells himself or herself that life can be better. Because life ought to be better. We have to stop the senseless killings, the wars, the fights, both within ourselves and outside. We have to first change our mind before we want to change others. We have to love ourselves, stand strong and stand strong in the face of virtue, against vices, to the best of our human abilities, while trusting that our life will be navigated in such a way that we come to find virtue, a thing we ordinarily come to practice in our lives. Because it matters what you think, it matters how you become a saint today. I am Biringkpa in the Mecca, the mendicant. I am your brother. See you next time.